Pawn Stars is known for having some of the craziest items, such as this three-piece suit that was worn by George Washington, but when it comes to these items, it was a bit different. From fake footballs to Napoleon's autographs, and even a whole painting worth up to $2 million, these are the craziest items in pawn shop that turned out to be completely worthless.
If it's authentic, this could be a $1 million piece.
It all started when a guy came into the shop with a special letter, one he claimed Napoleon signed himself. He presented the letter to Corey in a fancy frame along with the COA. Corey took note of the seal on the letter and said that it closely resembled the kind of seal used in Napoleon's time. He was very interested, especially since the letter looked so legitimate. He asked the owner for his price, and the guy said $10,000. He probably thought he could make a small fortune off the letter, but he was severely disappointed when Corey offered only $1,500.
I'm thinking more along the lines of $1,500.
Ooh, that sounds low.
He did this because of how common Napoleon's signatures are in the world, and while they are special, they aren't worth that much. After haggling, the two of them settled for $2,000. The owner left with $8,000 less than he expected, but Corey was proud of his purchase, thinking that it was the real deal. But was it? Corey showed off his newly purchased letter to his family, but his happy mood was ruined when Rick questioned the authenticity of the letter. They could sell it for 6 times what they bought it for, but only if it's the real deal. Corey stuck to his opinion, pointing out that it came with a COA, but his father reminded him that they had seen fake COAs in the past. Corey still thinks he's being picked on, but to shut his family up, he takes the framed letter to someone for analysis. Little did he know that his joy was about to turn sour. The professor of history that Corey met with to check the letter said that it was a speech given by Napoleon after he won a significant battle. Having the original copy that was written on the battlefield would have been insane, but unfortunately, Corey had spent $2,000 on a fake.
This is not one of those original manuscript copies.
No.
He really should have checked it out before paying for it, and his father and brothers certainly didn't let him live it down. Though what would you do if you were in Corey's situation? Though this wasn't the only time someone tried to pawn a piece of writing thinking it was worth something. But now, let's talk about a cool grandpa who walked into the shop with a signed football in his hand, claiming that it was given to his uncle by Ronnie Bull in 1967. He even had a picture of the football star handing his uncle the ball. At first glance, everything seemed great, and it looked like the perfect find. The crazy thing about this football was that it was from an era when professional football wasn't as popular as it is today. But somehow, on the ball, there were signatures of several iconic NFL legends like Gale Sayers and Brian Piccolo. Corey said that the ball would be worth a lot of money, especially since Brian Piccolo's signature was so rare. Coupled with the other big names on the ball, the owner thought he could sell it for $10,000.
Just from what I've seen, just what I put on it was $10,000.
Corey said he had to give it appraised by another person since he couldn't authenticate the ball by himself. The owner had no issues with it and had no doubt that the ball was the real deal. But both the owner and Corey were shocked when the expert came in and announced that the ball wasn't genuine.
They were signed by somebody else other than the athlete.
A couple of signatures, like Dick Butkus and Coach George Halas, were authentic, but the ball's major selling point was Brian Piccolo's signature, and that turned out to be a clubhouse signature. The owner's initial expectation of $10,000 was reduced to only $1,000 tops. What a loss. Corey even offered him $100, but he chose to keep his ball. After all, he had held on to it for 45 years, so why not a couple of more? But this wasn't the biggest letdown in Pawn Stars history. That honor belongs to a painting that we'll talk about at the end. And after we get into that, let's talk about another crazy item. A guy showed up with a newspaper, but it wasn't just any newspaper. He claimed that it was an original copy of the Boston Globe printed a day after the Titanic sank. It was a big claim, and Rick immediately pointed out the perfect condition of the newspaper, maybe even too perfect to be real. It was so neat, the guy might as well have brought it out of his mailbox that morning. It certainly didn't look like he had had it for 100 years. Rick took one look at it and instantly knew it was a fake.
It's fake. Why do you say that?
He pointed out a picture in the paper and told the owner that it was from a copy machine. Corey even joked that it might have been printed when the movies became popular.
Probably right after the movie came out.
Oh, the resale?
But today, it's worth absolutely nothing. The owner was pretty disappointed and took his newspaper home with him. And this would be a second time a piece of writing turned out to be completely worthless. But moving on, let's talk about another time that Rick was careful enough to have the item checked out before making a bad purchase. Guns have been pawned on the show a couple of times, but Rick and his boys have stated clearly that only antique firearms that aren't regulated by the government can be pawned. So when this guy showed up with an authentic-looking French musket, Rick got excited about the gun, but immediately had a few concerns. If the gun was indeed as old as the man was claiming it was, there should have been wear marks where a soldier would hold the musket. Back then, most militaries used guns for 50 years before changing or until someone stole them. So if the gun had been passed from one soldier to another for a couple of decades, there should have been extreme signs of wear. Rick's second concern was about the size of the breech. Speaking from his knowledge of English muskets, Rick said that the breech of the gun should have been larger, but he was handling a French musket, so he called an expert just in case he was wrong. The expert came in and pointed out the same concerns that Rick had. There were no signs of wear, and the breech wasn't as big as it should have been. The expert also pointed out that someone had intentionally tried to age the gun by painting it with an artificial patina. All in all, the gun was fake.
This most likely is a movie prop gun. This was never intended to be fired.
And what could have been sold for tens of thousands ended up having no worth at all. If you were disappointed because these items turned out to be worthless, wait until you see this painting that could have been worth millions. A man came into the shop with a large canvas painting and claimed that it was done by the painter Claude Monet. And all that Rick could do was look at the painting in disbelief, because if the painting was authentic, they were looking at an insane amount of money. Monet's most expensive painting sold for over $80 million. Even a fraction of that amount would have made Rick and his guy millionaires. Rick asked the guy where he got the painting from, and he said that he got it as collateral for a loan. The debtor had died, and so the painting became his. The owner then provided some documents to prove it was real, including an insurance policy of over $2 million from a museum where the painting was displayed several years ago. It all looked real, and while Rick was practically drooling over the painting, he couldn't make a move without confirming its authenticity. He called an expert in, and even the expert was stunned by the possibility of the painting being the real deal. The expert looked at the painting and had a few things to say. The document the owner came with said it was an earlier work of Monet's, but that was very vague and not trustworthy. He didn't think it was textured enough to be a Monet painting, and that it wasn't as colorful as the painter's other works. Despite his doubts, the expert wanted to get a second opinion just in case of the slight chance that the painting would be real. So he did Rick's signature move and brought his own expert. Bringing in a second expert showed just how high the stakes were. They could all walk out of the shop happy and set for life, or disappointed and burdened with a worthless painting. But unfortunately for Rick, everything went downhill once the second expert showed up. He checks for cracks in the painting, which is a common sign of age in really old pieces like Monet's, but he didn't see a single crack, not even in the signature. He checked the back of the painting where he expected some paint to have seeped through and stained it, but it was spotless. The painting was ultimately fake.
But it's not absolutely not by the hand of Claude Monet.
How sure are you of this?
200% sure.
And the owner's $1 million expectations were flushed down the drain. Rick was glad he didn't waste any money on the painting, but the owner really got the short end of the stick. Not only was he saddled with a fake painting, but he would never get his money back from that debtor who used it as collateral. Though what would you have done in all of these situations? Would you have figured out they were fake, or would you be risky like Corey? Let us know down in the comments below.